Okay, we're live now. Absolutely great. I am so thrilled to welcome all of you to Esports. I have to maybe just do a little bit of housekeeping stuff first, and that is first, this is being live streamed on Facebook, so everybody who wants to watch it can, and then we're also recording it so we can share the video after the fact. So please engage with the questions and comments on Facebook, or use the chat on Zoom. We'll try to get through as many of the questions as we can during the process, and then afterwards we'll follow up with some as well. And I guess how I wanted to start with this is just to tell you about what it's like to be a parent to gamers, because, you know, and by that, I don't mean a parent to gamers, I mean a parent of gamers. I'm in that in-between generation where I actually really did play Pong when it first came out, and no one on this can even remember what that was. And I used to go to the bowling alley after school and play pinball at the bowling alley. But my three girls have grown up completely immersed in gaming. And many years ago, my daughter, who's 25, when she was 12, she crossed the bridge in Halo. And I had no clue what that was. I'm still not sure I entirely know. But what I can tell you is that other people who are gamers thought that was really impressive for a 12-year-old to cross the bridge in Halo. And I was bemoaning the fact that my kids were wasting all of their time on computer games. And when we'd be in the car, all they would want to do is whip out their phones so that they could find Pokemon everywhere. And then I decided, well, my whole philosophy around education is that students should own their own education. So maybe I actually have to take this stuff seriously. And in the process of taking it seriously, what I discovered is there's actually some really cool stuff going on in this. And, you know, for someone like me who's dedicated the last 20 years of my life to education, to make the mental shift from esports being a waste of time to esports being a really important avenue to learning, but also a whole industry that we have to create talent for, was a big shift, a huge shift. And so as the superintendent of Stanza, I decided that we would dive in wholeheartedly and create an esports program so that our students could go to college on the scholarships that are coming out of this, could get jobs in the industry, everything from marketing to human resources to game design, lots of that stuff. But also just as teenagers, to be able to use the context of gaming to learn things like collaboration and teamwork and communication and strategic thinking. These are huge. And our partner, we think, has been absolutely critical in helping us think it through so that students are not just becoming brilliant gamers, but they are also learning and growing as human beings who are going to go to college and have lives and be successful. So that is by way of introduction, and I want to introduce some folks to you who are experts in esports. I am so pleased to have Adrian Riesly and Diane Grochon with us. And Adrian is the genius at WeThink, who has worked so hard to really make, to wrap this instructional strategy around e-gaming and make them complementary. And Diane Grochon, who has just finished a pilot implementation of an esports league at the Learn for Life public schools, where she's actually been collecting a lot of the data around how being engaged with esports can improve the learning that's happening in the classroom. So with that, I'm just going to pop it over to Adrian.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caprice. If everyone will bear with me while I pull up my presentation. All right, everybody. Again, Caprice, thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure working with you and Diane and everyone over at Learn for Life. I am going to, apologies, we're going to back this up. I am going to quickly go over kind of a brief really overview of the esports industry and why this is important. Obviously, Caprice did an excellent job at stating her perspective. What's beautiful about this gigantic industry that kids are obviously interested in and engaged in is that it really kind of can resonate with everybody in different ways. And so, Caprice, your perspective was extremely helpful. And to really fill that in, I will now share my perspective and how the gaming industry and esports as a whole has really impacted me over time. So first off, I am the head of education over here at WeThink, and we've been working with Caprice to really help pull out some of those skills and some of that data that these students are getting, from the program that we have over there. So with that, let's take off now. I'm sure someone may or may not giggle, but in the bottom left corner here, we see a picture that I took, thankfully, so you can't see how much hair I've lost over the years, of a LAN party that I held in the year 2000. I think I was around 8th or 9th grade. And I'll be honest, I wasn't a great student. I wasn't super engaged. I had high potential. Just engagement was a problem for me. However, I love to game, and I'm from Arkansas. So in the woods of Arkansas in the year 2000, broadband internet wasn't really a thing. Home routers that just worked wasn't a thing. And me and some of my friends pulled our computers together. We put them all on this table, and we were going to play a video game together in person. We thought this was the most brilliant idea that we had ever had. Well, sure enough, like most tech does, it didn't work. Now, I didn't have much in a small town to work with, but it dawned on me I should talk to the school's IT guy. So I actually went up to the school at like 5 p.m. on a Friday, and my IT director taught me how to network computers together so that I could play the games that I wanted to play. And from that one moment and that one experience where an educator imparted knowledge into me, and I was extremely willing to learn in that moment and engaged, I later really one of my first like career moves was to become a network engineer, and networking became really the core of my career in the early days. Moving from a network engineer, I decided, like, you know what, I love gaming, I love education, I'm going to work my way back into that. I became a technology director at a few school districts, later on a CTO, and the students would find out that I played, and then it was like, well, let's create a program around that, Adrian. Like, what can we do? We want to play. And I started doing those things. And then in 2018, I moved from Arkansas to California to work over at Play Versus and really help consult with schools across the nation and really across the continent as to how to put their programs together, what that might look like, and what it takes to do so. And I've really enjoyed that. But again, all stemming my entire career at this point, being 35 years old, is from my interest of gaming from early on. And I think it's important to note that because a lot of people look at esports as the future. And I'm here to tell you that, like, no, it's already here. We're playing catch up, right? We're trying to help these students. Like, I fell down into a career and kind of got lucky. What Caprice is doing and what we want to do over here, we think, is to help students package that up and be like, here you go. Here's this wonderful way to succeed in life and another alternative way to learn, to engage, and to grow with your peers, and really just in your career overall. So that's my story and how gaming and the gaming industry really impacted me. I'll make some very clear definitions here. Yes, esports are video games, but not all video games are esports. So when we say video games, your mind may go in a million different ways, but it's important that we hone that in. And video games in general are very recreational. There's a lot of personal enjoyment that's there, and they're very individually focused. And what we do with esports is we take that and we look at specific games that provide team-based environments so that students are now on a competitive team. It's very structured, and they have that positive mentor, coach, teacher in their lives. And not only does that help in terms of providing the structure for the students to actually be learning, but you also have that positive mentor that's overseeing that learning environment, which is obviously going to increase the results from that overall.
So wait, Adrian, I just got to interrupt you for a sec. You've just burst the bubble of a whole bunch of kids out there who are thinking now, wait, I can't just play video games for credit?
Yes, yes, that is not how this works by any means, for sure. So we obviously focus, you know, the program to make sure that you are interacting with your peers, and not just interacting with your peers in the games that you like, and some of the games that you like, but you're interacting with them in a positive way, in a very focused way, right? Just like with any competition, you obviously want to win. Well, guess what it takes to win when you're on a team of any type? It takes those very essential skill interactions with your teammates that does prepare you for success. And that can expand from winning one game on one day that means a lot to you, to meeting sales goals later in life and working on a sales team, to you know, participating, let's just take it to a smaller level, participating on another group project within your school and being successful with that team. As I'm sure we've all had experiences where we've been on group projects where we wished everybody had a little more experience and better skills working on group projects. So the way these skills and essential skills really expand is incredible, and again really fits all throughout life. So great point, Caprice, thank you. And while it may burst some students' bubbles to know that they can't just go play any game and all of a sudden get credit, the beauty of it is that there are extremely popular games and ways that you can implement this that students are very excited about. So promise the fun is still there, which increases that engagement as well, which Diane will speak about. In terms of hard numbers. So just to be clear, let's cover some essential skills that you do see in this type of environment, and something that we think, you know, that we really value over here, we think, and help to pull out of these students within the program. So let's define essential skills, or soft skills, if you will, personal attributes that enable someone to interact effectively and harmoniously with other people. And every skill that you see listed at the bottom of the screen here is a skill that we support very directly within the program that we've helped set up over there at Learn for Life. And it's really exciting to see. Moving forward, I want to cover the top 5 reasons that I would personally say are of the most importance when it comes to why esports and education. So if we haven't convinced you yet already, you may be still stuck on that for a minute. So let me cover the bases real quick. For me personally, student achievement's at the top of the list, at the very top of the list, because that impacts every single student. Yes, there are scholarships. Yes, there are students that will potentially pursue careers within the industry, but that's a percentage of the kids that might get involved. Every single kid will be impacted when in terms of student achievement. I believe this wholeheartedly. If you increase student engagement, you increase student achievement. At the end of the day, that's my number one reason. But moving on from that, the beauty of it, again, there are a million different benefits. So tackling scholarships, right now there are over $15 million and over 200 colleges and universities here in the nation worth of scholarships and scholarship opportunities out there for students. Careers, I've got, my next slide is going to really touch on careers. Caprice touched on it a little bit, but just about any you know, career path that you could imagine, or occupation that you can imagine, probably exists within the gaming industry. IT, Caprice said, human resources, marketing, sales, you know, business development, you name it, it all exists within that industry. And then obviously the essential skills, which we just covered on the previous slide. And another way to really look at this, not only, and especially true in a world where we have more and more virtual applications of learning, digital citizenship. Along with those essential skills, you're also teaching students how to interact even in a competitive environment. Because I can promise you, I played sports in traditional sports in high school, and the refs and the fans, they don't hear or see everything that happens on the field. What's really neat about this environment, again, a nice, safe environment for students to participate in, is that everything is seen in that digital world. And so now you have these learning opportunities where students can learn how to win or lose appropriately with the aid of, you know, the positive mentor, coach, teacher that's in the room with them. So digital citizenship is huge, and obviously of more and more importance as time goes on. So stepping back again to the careers, I really want to put this into perspective in terms of what we focus on in education. And I love when that light bulb came on for Caprice and you sharing your story there. And this hopefully shares some data that obviously Caprice knew in the back of her head, which is why that light bulb came on. But we're looking at a chart now at the global annual revenue of the gaming market. Now, esports, which is the competitive nature and team-based nature of the gaming market, is about $1 billion industry right now. But gaming as a whole is setting around the $180 billion mark. And
wait, did you say 180 billion?
I
$180 billion?
$180 billion. And honestly, Caprice, for me and my little brain, I can't fathom that number. So one fun fact that may help anybody else that can't quite fathom that number that's listening in today or perhaps watching the VOD later is that the entire film industry globally, annual revenue, 40 billion. The entire music industry, annual revenue, 30 billion. You can combine those two industries and think about all the educational and extracurricular and curricular programs that support students in finding careers in those industries. You can combine those and you don't even equal half. And I say that, obviously there's a lot of money in gaming globally, but more importantly, because there's so much money, there are so many more jobs and careers that are flourishing within that environment that we just need to help unlock students too. If you have an art student that's really struggling with engagement and not really super interested in school, but extremely talented student, if you can draw those lines and those connections, kind of like my IT director did with me and IT and networking, if you can draw those lines and say, hey, you may not love coming to school every single day, but I can tell you that you could be an artist at a video game company that you play right now that you absolutely love because you have those skills and abilities. But guess what? It's going to be a hard road to get there, and it's extremely competitive if you don't focus on that GPA and you don't focus on this education and the foundation of really what's going to set you up for that type of success. So again, put the whole industry in perspective. A lot of jobs out there.
You know, before we transition to Diane, I'd love it if you can tell us what you're hearing from school districts about how are they paying for this? Because that's kind of the first thing that every principal and superintendent's mind goes to as well. Yeah, that sounds great. Oh, you already anticipated I was going to ask you that.
No, I'm glad that you asked, Caprice. I'm ready for that question. So yeah, we have, just to point out some general funding pathways, no matter what type of school you are, whether you're public, private, charter, public charter, you know, really kind of the entire industry. Obviously, there's internal budgets and, you know, tuition type budgets that you could utilize. But outside of that as well, for some schools, you're looking at social emotional learning budgets, especially this year that are being rolled out. There at Learn for Life, you know, we really focus on the CTE side of things along internally in their program. So for others, CTE might be an option for them as well. Athletics, extracurricular, and the technology budget as well. I've had athletic directors and superintendents ask me like, okay, I get it, I'm sold, I'm in. What are these steps? How do I do this? And so in general, there's no right or wrong answer, but I would say one of the more common answers that I've seen is a lot of the technological, like the technology, like the hardware. And to be clear, a lot of the hardware that's out there already can run some of these games. It's not like this astronomical feat to supply that, but technology budgets usually get involved when it comes to that hardware. And then any of the others that you see there listed really fill in the gaps to support the students, you know, in the classroom and in different ways.
Adrian,
so, yeah.
I want to jump in a little bit because I think that one of the things that's deceptive about the funding pathways is that it's not that expensive to implement an esports program.
Yeah, for sure.
It really isn't that much more on your school budget than what you're probably already spending. You might have to upgrade a few things, or you might need to add a staff member or two, but it's not like another $100,000 that you have to add to your school budget.
Yeah, some programs spin up instantly, you know, in different ways. Like, and there's no, I would say, what we're doing at Learn for Life actually is really outstanding, and I think it's like kind of like the gold star. But there's different ways that things can be implemented where, you know, it varies, you know, extreme. There's extreme variances as to what you can do. Now, Caprice, you know, we haven't talked about this yet, but I've seen some schools build, you know, arenas and entire stadiums. I'm not going to pressure you in the spot in front of everybody, but you know, just to give you that idea of like where you're starting and where it could go in terms of what some schools do with this program once they start seeing the fruit of those labors.
I'm going to be calling those folks at SoFi Stadium that have the new thing and getting them to put us in there, because we can fill that stadium with students who are going to be high academic achievers and awesome gamers.
For sure. And one of the things that really helps, is once a school, and some of my favorite stories are once a school that does support a program and you spin a program up, once a student comes out of there and your teacher or coach has to say, how do I handle recruitment emails? I don't know. I had one coach one time tell me, he's like, I don't talk to the football guys, but I had to go ask them because I had never dealt with that before, how to guide a student in terms of college recruitment for a program and scholarship opportunities. So once those things start coming in, and obviously some of the data that I think Diane's going to go over here that obviously has Caprice and Diane excited about this, once you start seeing the true value and benefits of this, it really helps to motivate everyone, the entire community to kind of support it and push it forward. That is it for me. I want to turn it over to Diane next to kind of talk a little more about kind of exactly what's going on over there at the Learn for Life program.
Hi, yeah, I'm real excited about a lot of things, but let me explain a little background on myself. My name's Diane Grochon. I am the accountability administrator for Learn for Life, which is not a position you would usually assume becomes the esports person. And obviously I'm the eldest of this bunch, which also puts me in a generation that you wouldn't usually assume with esports. However, I'm a gamer. I'm a serious gamer for the past like 30 plus years. I've been competing in all kinds of tournaments. Tabletop games, I do board games, I do role-playing games, I do the whole gamut of games. So when Learn for Life decided to start an esports program, there was a certain degree of fit, even though it didn't seem quite so obvious on the surface. I was real comfortable with the power of esports, and a lot of my belief in all that was stemmed from very much the same sort of thing that Caprice talked about, in that I have a son, and I was a single parent for the vast majority of his life. My son is very definitely a computer geek, and I think he lived on various and sundry video games from the time he could, sit up at a table, and he's good at that stuff. What's interesting is that he got fascinated by the virtual games and the online games, and then ultimately in esports, to the point where he was intrigued by how those things were put together. And by the time he was in 6th grade, he was writing programs for games. He was developing games. He worked on projects for Nintendo. He's got some talents. He graduated from high school with 4 computer languages that he was programming in. He was working with the community college to fix their programs while he was still in high school. But that all spun from, he started out playing games. And so he was very comfortable. I think I've talked to, been visiting with some of his friends, and we've been having some conversations about this, that I think their generation, in a way, my generation thinks of computers as a tool to use to write papers or make presentations or do research. Their generation thinks of it as a way to breathe. And it is their socialization. It is what they do.
Say that again. Their generation thinks about it as a way to breathe.
Breathe, as in oxygen.
Yeah.
They do, everything is online. Everything for them is online. When my son was younger, there was a lot of conversation among my peers about, well, he's not socializing, and they were worried about that. And I'm going, I don't know what you're talking about, but he's usually talking to about 10 people at a time in 3 different countries online while he's playing these games. That's pretty good socialization for my idea, but it's different, and it really is different. And these, my son's generation and the younger kids see this interaction is happening online. And Adrian brought it up a little bit about the digital citizenship. My son hasn't applied for a job. I mean, he's in his 30s now. He has never applied for a job in person. It's always been online. He said interviews online. He had his first real job was as a programmer and writing code for a very large database group, education database group in the state. He never did an in-person interview. It was all done online. Matter of fact, he didn't meet anybody in the office until he'd been on the job for a couple of weeks. And that is normal in his world. That's what happens. So I think there's part of this is they're very comfortable with it. That generation and younger are very comfortable with this. My generation is not and doesn't understand it very well. So it's really, really good. But here I've got this son who's hugely successful, who's doing a really good job in the programming world. He and a couple of friends of his are currently developing a game that looks like it's going to be published in the next year or so. And it all spun because he started out playing games when he was very, very young. So I became real comfortable. I'm going to make one other comment that I hadn't planned on, but you touched on it, Adrian. I thought about it in terms of career and the money thing. What I had as a son when he was in like 5th, 6th grade, he was going to be a game developer. That was his career choice. He was going to develop games, and the mother in me panicked because I had seen the numbers, and game developers make really, really good money. If they're really, really good, they can get hired. It's kind of like saying, I'm going to be the football quarterback for UCLA. Well, yeah, if you can make it, great, but most people don't make it. Most football players don't make that. And it was the same thing with the game developer until I started reading some of the game developer magazines that were doing research on careers and on pay, and realized that the programming for the games became corporate world, business world programs about 2 years later. So if you were learning how to write the programs, these rather complicated, intricate programs for games, you're 2 years ahead of the industry, and the job market is huge. So outside of the gaming world, if you're aiming for games, you end up in a better place generally if you're wanting to do IT. So that's my little, I breathed easier as a mother and decided, okay, that's cool. So that's what he did. As I said, I'm working for Learn for Life, and we have this, Learn for Life is a large group of charter schools scattered across the country, but centered really in California. Most for the esports program, and our program is right now, we're working just with the high school kids. Our high school students, I think it helps to put this in perspective a little bit. Our average high school student has come to us because traditional schools didn't work for them. They were unable to succeed. Some of them have been in some level of trouble because of it. Some of them just couldn't succeed in the system because the system didn't work for them. So what we're dealing with are a bunch of students who walk in the door believing that school is a waste of time, generally. And one of our biggest tasks that we're trying to accomplish is to make them believe that school has something of value for them. And to get them into the habit of regularly doing their work and regularly attending and making academic progress. When we decided to team up with WeThink, their program was so perfect for us because of the focus on those skills that Adrian listed, because it was focusing primarily on those life skills and using gaming really kind of as a way to get those skills in the blood, right? So it matches our goals really well. It works great for the kids. They want to play the games. Honestly, they come to esports because they want to play the games. And oh, by the way, we're going to have this other cool thing. So we ended up with this pilot. We had just about 50 students that participated in our pilot from multiple charter schools across the state. It was right smack dab in the middle of the pandemic. So these kids were all operating from home. So we had that other little added challenge to address. These weren't kids that were coming into a site that we could work with them. But we managed to get around that, and that worked well. We are running, and we're running again this year now, an intro to esports class that had no prerequisites as far as the kids were concerned. All they had to do is be enrolled in our schools. We didn't make any requirements in terms of they had to have a certain GPA or they had to demonstrate any kind of success in school. They did not need to know how to do anything other than how to turn on the computer. If they could turn on a computer, and everything else we got. So We did that very deliberately because we wanted to make this a program that was open to everybody and that there was no barrier to entry, that also gave us a chance to work with these kids and get them used to the idea of regular attendance, regular reporting, and doing their schoolwork, because we did make it a requirement that they had to maintain schoolwork in order to stay in the program. So they didn't have to have anything great on the books walking in, but in order to stay, they had to keep pace. And that turned out to be wonderful and worked really well. Hold
One
on.
of the questions that we got separately was,
Sure.
Was the parents being concerned about how much time their son spends on the computer, isolated, as if there isn't a world of stuff around him, and Adrian, I'm sure this is a question that comes up all the time.
All the time. I've
All
taken
the
this one
time.
all the time. So I love it, and I'll address this, Diane, while you pull that presentation up. But essentially, just like anything, just like in traditional sports, there are certain balances that students have to take, and there are unhealthy ways to be in traditional sports, and there are unhealthy ways, in general, to game. My kind of goal in general at this point is to get more adults involved with students. And in what better environment could you possibly, if you do see those problems, if you do think maybe my child's spending too much time, or maybe what better environment do we have to teach them about that balance and the importance of that balance than within a school and within a program and an esports program.
Right.
So I really look at it as like, are there problems? Certainly in many different ways, in many different industries, different games, sports, esports, it doesn't really matter. Even in the arts, you can go overboard. So balance is key. And us as adults, as educators, as parents, all coming on board and getting involved. And I know this is really cliche, but it's what we do in education, is try to meet kids where they are. The goal is here, let's meet kids where they are. And this ties into that digital citizenship as well. Let's start training them what is appropriate, what is too much, how much sleep maybe do you need to make sure your GPA is up, and make sure that you're focusing on these other things so that you can tie in and now also be able to play the games with your friends, but now in a completely new positive scenario, instead of this unknown kind of, I don't know what they're doing, it's just a lot of time and something like that. So it's really about getting involved. It's a great question that a lot of people, need to hear the answer to. So essentially, getting involved is going to help curb that issue more than, not getting involved. Great question.
A quick answer. There's a question there about Kenneth's game. It doesn't have a name yet. It's a interesting.
Oh, this is the question.
Yeah.
What game is your son developing?
No, yeah, they haven't named it. They've just played it. Okay. So, but this is just kind of a general picture of what we had student-wise enrolling. The vast majority of them were in that kind of typical high school age. We have older kids because of the kinds of programs we run. The vast majority were males. This is not surprising, although I don't like it. There's no barrier to a female playing in esports whatsoever, other than the cultural picture that comes from the females themselves. The females tend to think of this as a male activity and don't enroll. There is nothing stopping them.
Well, before you go too far on that, Diane, what I will say that, so I have 3 active daughters who are gamers.
Right.
And they say they wish that this course had existed, because one of the things that is part of the course is digital citizenship and how do you treat each other online.
Right.
And they, all 3 of them have said, yeah, they have faced some serious sexism online that makes it maybe not as fun for female gamers. And by having this structured environment where none of that bad behavior is allowed, because we're playing on different servers in a closed circumstance, it actually makes it possible for the girls and women to develop their gaming skills without having to deal with all of the baloney that's out there. And I think that's actually a really big reason why having these programs in schools makes sense.
Yeah, and it makes sense, and I think that's why our numbers are low, is that their anticipation versus the reality. We think has been doing a spectacular job of actively recruiting women female participation. And the screen that Adrian showed was an all-girl esports team, which they bring in to the discussions with the kids during the classes. So these, one of the games that the students are playing in the course of this program, they don't know who they're playing against. They're just playing against another esports team and who are spectacularly good and slaughter our kids terribly. And at the end of the game, it's like, oh, and by the way, there's no men on these teams at all. They're all females, which is just such an eye opener for everybody. So we think it's really been doing something very positive in that direction for our kids. Real eye-opening. This is our typical student body. Socioeconomic disadvantage tends to be our norm, and that is reflected here. And you can see that the ethnic breakdown of the group, these are the kids that were in the course. So this is one of the results that we had that it was so wonderful as far as I was concerned. On the left, what you're seeing is this is the number of students that were in the program that participated at least 25% of the session. So there's 12 weeks of sessions. They were there for at least 3 of them, right? Which is a pretty small number, actually. Before they were doing, these are our learning periods, it's basically a month of school. Before they were doing esports, they weren't, the vast majority of them were not even earning 4 credits per month, which is way below what they're going to, they'll never graduate from high school at that rate. And that same group doubled the number of kids that were earning 4 or more credits per learning period, which for us is a huge, huge jump. And these kids, these other 46 up here that didn't get the 4 credits, all but a couple of them actually increased. They just didn't get to the four credit mark. So they were doing like 1 credit a month before, and now they're doing 3 credits a month, which is huge in terms of academic achievement and movement. So anyway, so that we saw that, but the other thing we saw that I think is, as far as I'm concerned, more important actually, and this is kind of soft data, it's not the hard, I don't have numbers to share, but we had story after story after story of students who were in the esports program who weren't getting their work in, their regular math, English, science homework in, and were at risk of being dropped from the esports program because of it, right? And the other teammates got wind of it and jumped on them and said, no, you need to get that work in, get the work in. We're meeting tomorrow. We need to have your work in, get your work done. That conversation was almost a norm. The other one that we heard that I thought was cool, there was a student who was getting ready to drop out of high school. He was getting older. He wanted to go have his life and career. He was going to graduate in 6 months and he didn't care. He just wanted out of high school. He was going to drop. And his teammates got angry at him. It was an interesting conversation to listen in on because they're doing this on Discord. And so you can hear the conversation. And they were really upset with him. And they're saying, but if you leave, we don't have a team anymore. Our team will fall apart and we won't be able to win the competition because we'll be working with bots and not real people. And we've got to have you. They actually talked him into finishing, and he actually ended up graduating at the end of about the time he ended out the program, which I count as a huge success. So we're hearing those kinds of things. The other one, example I wanted to give you because I thought it was telling. There was outside of class, one of our teaching coaches was meeting with the kids and doing a practice game. And one of the kids in the practice game used some language that they probably shouldn't have been using. And the other kid, one of the other students jumped on him and says, Mr. Proctor's on here. He's hearing you. Don't say that things. You get in trouble for saying that kind of language. And before the coach teacher could even respond, one of the other students said, we shouldn't be using that language whether he's on or not. You just don't use that language. That's not a conversation I'm used to hearing from the students that we get in general. In general, these are pretty rough kids. And it was really cool to hear that kind of a transition had happened, that they recognize that there's some behavior they just need to change. And it was all thanks to the esports program and how it went. So all in all, I don't think we could be happier with what's going on. I'm real excited. We're going to be running we're getting ready to start up another cycle of this intro course. We have doubled the number of coaches, teachers, which means we can double the number of teams. We have, as the schools are coming back in, we have multiple school sites who have actually set up labs in their schools that are strictly a gaming lab. They're not a general use lab. So one of the things that we've had to do in terms of setup is separate out the internet access for the gamers from the internet access for our regular ed students. It's a security issue. We can't, our IT department was very nervous about some of the open source stuff that the gamers are using crossing over into the server that is protected data on students. So they've made kind of a firewall there, and they've developed this whole thing. But I'm excited. We've got these multiple sites that have actually set up labs. They've ordered computers for them. They've got them set up with all kinds of cool equipment. And then we're still doing the online version for students that need that, depending on what our situation is. I'm anticipating that we may have as many as 15 teams this year, possibly. We'll see as students enroll and what the numbers get. We are also planning, it's a 12-week program, so we'll run it for this semester. Then we have the second semester, which we'll do another 12-week of this intro program, but we're also aiming for a more advanced group of kids who want to be seriously competitive. And those kids would be working on competition at the outside of our organization. And those are the kids that will be working towards the possibility of getting standings that would get them things like scholarships and that sort of stuff. So really excited about where this is going. Couldn't have asked for anything better.
That's so great. Well, you've actually already answered one of the questions, but I want to just repeat it because the way you described was like, oh, and there are some technical issues that we've dealt with, right?
Yeah.
One of the questions has been, isn't this a nightmare for the school's IT staff? And isn't that the last thing that you would want to have a bunch of gamers in the school's IT system? And, you know, it sounded to me like the short answer that you gave was, yes, that could be a problem. And we've addressed them. Like those are definitely issues that have to get addressed. And we do that through firewalls, through separate servers, through different protocols, just to make sure that all of the student data that is required to be private remains private.
Right.
And that's a really key piece. Do you want to say anything else, Diane or Adrian, just about the technical setup of this?
Well, I'll finish what I was saying, and then I'll drop it to you because Adrian's probably, I am not the tech person. That is not my thing. I use it well. I can't put these together, but I've had to become kind of a tech savvy in order to coordinate and manage these things. And with the Learn for Life group, we have our own server that's used by our staff and keeps the student data and all that sort of stuff. And what our IT people were really concerned is they wanted that separate from what the gamers were getting into, because the gamers have to access games that are public games out there, right? And our internal IT protections on the student computers generally, and what they're using for academics, doesn't allow games. It's got a block. It won't let them access games. It won't let them access social media. It's all for protecting of the system, right? And for the kids. In order to play the games, they have to access Discord, which is a social media piece, and they also have to access the game. So we had to separate those. And our IT people worked out a pretty elegant and relatively simple solution. Once they kind of wrapped their heads around it, it really wasn't all that difficult. And my basic understanding, and Adrian, you may know this better than I do, I probably do, is that our server, our Learn for Life server is separate, standalone. The gamers don't have access to it. The non-gamers don't have access to the gaming system either. They have to be in the esports program in order to access the game world. And that is, we've actually separated those computers. They have no physical connection to the Learn for Life network. And they're accessing games.
And that's actually really important too, Diane, because what you're saying there is, we do recognize that in order to play esports and be gamers, they have to be able to be, quote, out in the world on the internet.
Right.
However, the beauty of this is they're out in the world on the internet with adult supervision.
Yep.
Right? And learning how to do that safely
Well, and I think one of the other interesting things that our kids didn't realize, and matter of fact, our teacher churches didn't realize until they got in, is everything we think does, all their record keeping, all the whole program, the games, the conversations that happen during the games, trainings, all that is happening in Discord, which is it's a social media, but it's designed for gamers, right? And the cool thing about Discord, the Discord channels, is that once a student is signed or a person is signed up in there, you know when they're on Discord, even if they're not talking to you, right?
Right.
So, and ditto for the way the game is set up, the way we're setting the games up, the kids sign up in that. And our coaches know that when the kids are playing the game, whether or not they're playing with the team or not. It was because of that we were able to catch a couple of problems that had developed that we would have never seen otherwise. If they had just gone off in their little world and done it, we would not have known that these things were brewing. And because they were going through that Discord, the students thought that our coaches, because it wasn't during class time, the coaches wouldn't know. And in fact, the coaches did know because it was through Discord. And so Discord says, hey, so-and-so's online, and you can go take a look and see what they're doing. So
that sounds a little big brothery though.
Yeah.
Well,
as a parent, I'm like, yeah, that's good. I kind of want a little bit of adult supervision, but as a kid, I may be thinking, oh, are they following me around?
Yeah, I think the best analogy that I've used in the past would be, imagine a basketball gym and a coach and students and basketball players, and they come to the school and they come to that place to play basketball and to be in that positive environment. Likewise, there are parks, there are other cities, there are other basketball gyms. There are things where students will travel freely throughout the world to go play basketball in many ways, may or may not be supervised, right? And the same is true in the digital world. So certainly, just to back up everything you two are saying, you can create an environment there at your school that is safe, that is secure, that you do have control over. The students come there for a purpose, and they're there for that purpose. And then they move on from that place in their personal lives, and it will not involve necessarily exactly where they were there at the school. And that creates that separation and that positive environment. From the technical side too, just to wrap that up, every school's technical environment looks very different. But from a network engineer perspective and CTO perspective, I can say you can confidently implement a program like this, meeting all federal and even state and local policies and even laws at times, to ensure that it's a nice, secure environment for your school. In any environment, to be clear, I help schools of all kinds, remote and on-site, and really expensive technical equipment and really cheap technical equipment. Help spin this up. So it's certainly doable. And I know there's a handful of questions. I don't want to run out of time. One I wanted to capture, one question is the image of a gamer changing? Typically, gamers are seen as outcast, loners, nerds, who are absorbed by their games. So in the early days, and that's it was more true. But today's games, the most popular ones by far, and certainly the ones involved with esports, obviously it's team-based, they are extremely social. When you look at it through that lens, yes, it's absolutely changing in terms of what that looks like. I can tell you, prior to the pandemic, that the most recent weddings that I attended were of people that I had only met on the internet and socialized with and became friends with. That's, I'm not, exaggerating that. It's just a fact. So yeah, it's extremely social at this point, and honestly more popular. And the reason that graph that I showed earlier is just going up and up, it's because now the games are becoming the social network and community. And I've seen some amazing surveys in the past, and a lot of times students will respond. I've asked in different organizations in the past, what was the biggest benefit that you got from the having esports at your school? And by and large, the majority says, well, I found a community. I found somewhere I belonged. I now not seen as, an outcast, but I'm around a group of peers who enjoy what I enjoy, just like you would have like a board game club after school or an arts and theater program. You're grouping students together. It's just, what's interesting about gaming is that your foundational base of the student body, by and large, wants to be a part of it. It's not just, only 10% or 20% of the kids. It is like 80, 90% of the kids are gamers.
Well, and that's what one of the questions that came in is what kinds of support does Stanza have? Is there staff specifically for this? And the answer is yes, we have staff specifically for this. So there's a coach who is a teacher who is responsible for running the esports program. And so all of our esports coaches have to go through specialized training so that they understand the games and that they understand all of the complexities that come with this, like managing student safety and privacy and the technology. They have to be taught that. But then also the coaches are really there to be able to guide the students effectively and to take the game from being just a game to being a learning experience. And one of the games that I snuck into and was sort of a ghost looking in on was really fascinating. I saw the students play the game, and at one point 3 out of 5 of them went off and had a battle, and about partway through the battle 2 of them came back, and the one that was still up there at the battle went from doing really well to crashing and burning. And then I stayed on the call, and the next thing that the coach did was replay the game so that everyone could watch what they did and what they said. And the coach said to the two team members who had left the person who was having the battle, what was your decision-making process for leaving? And the students were like, well, we thought he had it, and so left. And then the coach kind of probed more deeply. Well, what was your evidence that he had it? Did he tell you he had it? Could you see that the beastie he was attacking was clearly on the outs? And what I saw was the coach really guiding the questioning and the thinking about strategy, about communication, about teamwork, but in the context of debriefing this game. And that's what the staff is there for in this process, right? The staff is also there. We have technology folks on the tech team that support the technology, and so there's support there. We also have done some webinars for parents, so the parents know what the kids are getting themselves into and so on. So it's really not about just send the kids off to play esports. As a school, we're being very thoughtful about how it all integrates and supports the whole process of learning. And unlike Learn for Life, since Stanza International Academy is a private nonprofit online school, we don't have any limitations on the numbers of students we can take. Anybody who wants to do esports with Stanza can, and we will also sign up students who just want to do esports. Maybe they're going to stay in their traditional private school, but they're also going to be part of an esports class that's credited at Stanza. And it's that kind of flexibility that I think is coming more and more in education as a whole. I think 10 years from now, you're not going to get your entire 100% of your secondary school education all at the same institution. We're already seeing students, say, going to community colleges during the summer to get extra classes. And so we'll probably see more and more of that. Let me jump to the next question. I think this might be an Adrian or a Diane question. It's definitely not for me, but I've heard that there are awards or purses for esports champions. Will this become bigger and than national professional sports?
Well, I think I always like to state that nobody knows the future or can tell the future exactly. But in terms of the size of the industry and where everything is kind of moving, you certainly see millions and millions of dollars being awarded to champions in different events and different things and in different ways. In terms of viewership and involvement, and this brings up one other really key point that might be very useful for some of you out there. I personally do think that gaming will become as big, and if not bigger, than traditional sports in terms of what you know of and see of it today. And the reason being, not every student can physically, or every kid, or every human, not every person can physically compete in physical competitions. One of the heartwarming stories that I saw over the last few years was a student with muscular dystrophy that actually broadcasted football games because he loved being involved in sports, but he couldn't play. When that school, and when I talked to that coach and they brought up and created an esports program, that student now gets to be on a team, now gets to play with teammates, try to win games, have a coach, and have that interaction that that student couldn't have. So in terms of accessibility, inclusion, again, providing safe environments so that everyone feels like they can get involved and get engaged safely, I think it's going to be big. I think it's going to be very big. The number of people that can access it and jump in is greater because it's so easy to do.
Well, and one of the comments in the chat that an expert is saying here, there's more viewership in esports than the NFL right now. Well, obviously with COVID, of course, but I think that's gonna change. And by change, I mean that there's still gonna be even more viewership in esports than the NFL, even when people are allowed to go back into the stadiums.
Yeah, a big piece of that is it's global. So, you know, an esport event can be broadcasted easily if you wanted it to a global audience right out the gate, right? And a global audience, these games oftentimes are global. And so, you know, people who want to watch, I personally watch championships from other countries frequently in my house every week. It's something that I partake in and then others do around the world. So yeah, it's absolutely amazing to see it grow.
And I also think I'm going back to a generational thing. I may be more aware of it just because I'm more generational, I guess. But when we talked about stadiums, if people haven't really looked at esports, I mean, seriously, like paid attention to it, they fill stadiums. Yeah. The last big national esports competition in this country, or not this country, but in California, the tickets for Staples Stadium was sold out in 15 minutes. They totally sold out the stadium of spectators. And these aren't just people playing, these are people watching. So I think that those of us who are not so savvy about this are asking that question about, is it going to be big? Are there lots of people?
It already is.
It already is big. Yeah. It already is a lot of people. It's just my generation hasn't quite caught on to that yet.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank both of you for spending this time with me to talk about esports. You know, I think it's super, super exciting. And from a Stanza International Academy perspective, the foundation of who we are as a school is all about creativity and discipline. And creativity and discipline in the context of what's the world going to be for this generation. And one of the things that one of our graduation speakers at this last graduation this year said was, if you want to predict the future, you have to make history. And I think that esports is going to be about making history, and it'll be the future since it's already the present. Anyway, that's a lot of cliches all in one statement, but thank you very much for joining us. And thanks to everybody who's been sending in all these great questions. And we will post this so that if you have a friend that you wish would have seen it, or, you know, maybe you're a teenager wanting to convince your parents to allow you to participate in esports, hopefully this will help you make that case. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks.